So, and I see that you wanted me to explain strike price. Okay, so you have a startup. And let's just say you are a startup that is wanting to raise money right now for a Series A. Typically, you start with a seed round, then it's Series A, B, C, D, etc., etc. And typically there's also, like, before a seed, there's like a pre-seed round or an angel round or something. You're just taking money from people in exchange for ownership in your company. What they do is the lead investor at any of these given rounds determines the valuation of your company, and they invest a certain amount at that valuation. And so if, for example, you ever see a startup where it's like, they raised 10 on 50. That means that the startup raised $10 million on a 50 million valuation. So the investors own that 10 million out of the 50 million, and so they own a fifth of the company. That's actually a really bad deal, but go with the example. And so with that 10 on 50, that determines the strike price, where the number of shares in the company is some small number. The number of shares, the value of the shares is determined by that valuation and what has been put into it. And so when you're an employee, you get a percentage of that ownership that the company still has that the investors don't own. So if out of the 50 million investors own like the 10 million part of it, the other $40 million in this particular example, Charlie, thank you so much for the gift subs. You're great. The other 40 million is for the employees, for the founders, and then any previous investors in previous rounds and stuff. And that's how the allocation goes. And the strike price is the price per individual share. And typically that price is very small at first and then gets larger over time because the valuation of the company grows. And so at like a seed round or earlier, the shares might be worth like 2 cents each or less. And it's just like, yes, I have 50,000 shares in X company, but that's worth like $10 or something like that. Like it's typically a small amount, but as the company raises more money, the value of those shares goes up. And so, for example, at a typical Series C startup size, those shares are each like $5 each-ish. That's just an estimation. At like a Series A, they're typically less than $1 and that kind of stuff. And so when you join a startup, it's riskier to join at the seed stage or Series A stage, maybe Series B, but your share strike price is worth less. So when the company says, hey, you can buy ownership in the company, your stock options, you have the option to buy your ownership in the company, you can buy it at a much lower price than if someone joins the company at Series D. Yes, it's more secure, but their share price is probably more like $15 a share rather than like less than $1 at the share. And so that's kind of the balance, where it's much more risky to join a startup that much earlier, but your ownership is worth a lot more. Does that make sense? Let me know if I can clarify anything. Is vesting a good thing in general, or it really depends on the company and its future? Are vested options a good thing to buy? It's always a lottery ticket. So vested options always a good thing to buy. It depends. Like it always is not a good word for it. How do you liquidate though? If no one goes IPO? Great question. So, first of all, I used to think it's always a good thing to buy it because it's a good investment if you believe in the company, but companies fail all the time. And so if the company fails, your ownership in the company fails and that investment goes away. But if the company succeeds, that could be pretty big money. It could be big money because for example, I know some people who were involved with the GitLab IPO who bought their shares at less than $10 or something a share. And then when it IPO'd, and I don't know what the strike price is now, but there was a point where it was like $85 a share. That's a lot of money. And so it could really be an exponential thing. That being said, for liquidation, you typically have to wait for a startup to exit. So when the company IPOs or if it gets bought, that means your shares are converted to cash. So if the company is bought, for example, Netlify bought Gatsby, I don't think they announced how much they bought it for. Whatever the price that Gatsby was, everybody has their ownership of the company, that they split that price of the company into how many shares there are, and depending on how many shares you bought, you get the cash value of that based on the buy price. Some companies, when they raise a new round, they give you the option to do what's called like a buyback. And so if, let's just say, you bought a ton of your shares at seed round prices, and so they were like less than $1, it ended up not costing you much, but because you had so many, you were an early employee, let's just say you spent like $3,000 or something buying all of these very early shares. Let's just say your company then raises a Series B. Now your shares are probably worth something more like $10 a share, let's just say. Some companies will offer the option for them to buy back your shares from you, and so you won't own them anymore, but you probably are now at like $30,000 or something like that. And so it's an option to get out of that investment earlier, where you lose the ability to buy those options again, or keep them at that very low price in case the company does IPO someday, but you can get that liquid cash, if that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. Faisal, thank you so much for the gift subs. You're great. It's business gambling, exactly. Let's see. I'm still holding $8 in shares, but what I was promised is a unicorn, but it's just a zombie. Also, sometimes there will be two classes of shares. Employees typically get common shares and investors may get preferred shares. Yes. And so that's a whole other thing where there's preferred stock and common stock, and preferred goes to the investors. That means that as the company is liquidating, investors get their money first. And as things change over time, there have been cases where, like, let's just say economy stuff goes down and things like that before things are paid out, you end up getting a lot less cash than you would have. I admit I don't see that often. I'm pretty sure that is a somewhat common thing, but common, get it? Common shares, common thing. But I admit I don't see it that often. Usually the employees do get something. But yes, that is a thing. It took me 20 failed startups to hit one successful one. Yeah. Why would they buy back instead of lay me off and expire my options? Yeah, it's very hard to get visibility on preferred and common. So, when you buy your options, you own them even when you leave the company. So that kind of answers that in a way, where once your options vest, they are yours to buy until a certain point. So some companies where, let's just say they do lay you off, or let's just say you quit, you have something like 30 days or 90 days past your last day to buy any shares that you want. If you leave them on the table, they're gone and they go back into the company pool. They belong to the company now. But if you buy them, even if you leave the company, they are yours forever. And so, like, I worked at a startup called Clarify, where it was Series A when I joined, and currently it's at Series C. I bought my shares when I quit, and they're just still sitting there. They also haven't had a buyback option thing, so I'm just really hoping they exit someday, so that my little baby investment in it can be worth something at some point. And so if you have bought your vested options, they are yours to keep no matter what. If you didn't buy them, then you and they lay you off, for example, but they're vested, you again have that period of time to buy them. If you end up vesting them and you never buy them, they're just never yours. If you end up getting laid off or you quit before your stock options vest, then that equity is worth nothing because you never bought it in the first place. So vesting just means that you have earned the option to buy your stock in the company.